Now, the big issue with doing it this way is human error. It's very easy to just go through the motions and make it look like you're working, but producing little in the way of force and tension to the muscle. Whereas if you get someone who has the right mentality, it can really push themselves. You can create enough fatigue that after a 60 to 90 second set, you realistically can't lift your arms anymore. Now, again, that kind of fatigue might not be desirable, but it was very interesting that he was creating devices that would allow you to do that. Again, I'm not aware of anyone else that was putting out anything that was, for lack of a better term, high tech at the time.
Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This episode is brought to you by MedX Precision Fitness in Toronto, Canada, a leading-edge fitness facility co-founded by my friend Blair Wilson, who has featured on the podcast numerous times. MedX Precision Fitness are highly respected in the strength training industry, and with the help of a wonderful team, have grown a very popular and successful training facility. They've been featured in the Huffington Post, the Globe and Mail, Toronto Guardian, and many more. They provide complete fitness in as little as 20 minutes per week and use evidence-based, high-effort strength training to give you the most efficient and effective workout you'll ever have. As many of you long-time listeners will know, this is the perfect workout for the busy executive. Aside from Blair's bulging muscles, there are no distractions, so no mirrors, no loud music, and no meatheads walking around everywhere. MedX Precision Fitness uses some of the most sophisticated and high-quality equipment available in the way of the MedX machine line, delivering you the best results possible. As well as personal training, they offer nutrition coaching and bod pod services to optimize your health, muscle gain, and fat loss, and give you instant feedback on your progress. Book a free consultation now by going over to medxpf.com. That's medxpf.com, medxpapafoxtrot.com, and book your free consultation now. Hey guys, I am Lawrence Neal and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior, the podcast that shows you how to get the most out of your high intensity training and how to start and grow your strength training business. My former guests include the who's who in high intensity training, guys like Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay and Jim Flanagan, paleo pioneers Mark Sisson and Rob Wolf, strength training entrepreneurs like Luke Carlson and Adam Zickerman, sports scientists, high intensity training bodybuilders, New York Times bestselling authors, high intensity training case studies, and everything in between. My guest today is high-intensity entrepreneur and owner of STG Strength and Power, Mike Petrella. Many of you have been asking for an episode that focuses entirely on exercise machines. And there are a few people that know more about the different types of exercise machines, how they compare, and how to best to select machines than Mike Petrella. I met Mike at the Resistance Exercise Conference. Lovely guy. Really enjoyed chatting with him, and only wish I had a little bit more time to actually speak with Mike because we were so busy doing lots of stuff at the conference. So it was really a pleasure for me to be able to get Mike on the show and get to know him a little bit better, understand his business, and talk all about machines. Mike's facilities, and you can see all of this on his YouTube channel, which will be listed in the show notes, boasts one of the most impressive and biggest collections of high quality exercise machines I've personally ever seen. He is a real exercise machine aficionado. And I took this opportunity to ask him all about everything regarding machines. So we talked about his machines versus conventional machines and sort of more contemporary machines you might find in more kind of mainstream gyms. The best pieces, in his opinion, for different muscle groups. His favorite pieces for simulating all sorts of different muscles. We talk about the different machines and the different brands and their advantages and disadvantages. We talk about, what many high intensity gyms overlook in terms of when they select and buy machines, and much, much more. For all of the podcast episodes and to see this episode in the show notes, please go to corporatewarrior.co/podcast. And now I give you Mike Petrella. Let's go. Mike, welcome to Corporate Warrior.
Thanks for having me on.
You are most welcome. It was really good to finally meet at the Resistance Exercise Conference. But unfortunately, you and I didn't talk all that much. I don't know how that happened, but I know we were both very busy catching up with lots of people. So just glad to have you on now and get the chance to ask you a bunch of questions, which I didn't get to talk to you about at the conference. So, as I was saying to you earlier, having researched, I guess, a lot about you, I was on your YouTube channel today, and I decided that basically, I'm going to pack up everything I own, grab my dog and my girlfriend, and move to Canada to basically train at your gym, because it's just unbelievable, or one of your gyms. One of the most impressive gym tours I've ever seen. And so I'd love to obviously talk about it with that in mind, talk about kind of your experience and knowledge and collection of exercise machines. And to take it right back to the start, for those listening that maybe don't understand the differences between, Nautilus and MedX and some of these more sophisticated machines versus the more conventional machine, can you just give an overview of what makes those machines different in terms of things like friction and strength curves and weight travel and stuff like that?
Sure. First of all, you're welcome to come to Canada anytime you like, but unfortunately this year we've had about 6 months of solid winter, and I know that sounds par for the course coming from a Canadian, but we've had a very long, very cold winter. So you might want to wait till the spring or probably the summer to make the pilgrimage over here.
I'll bear that in mind.
As for the machines, I guess I'll start where I got started with them. And I was weight training for hockey, again, a very stereotypical Canadian training to be a stronger hockey player. And you met me at the conference. For those who don't know, I'm 6'4", and I'm relatively long in the arms and the legs. And a lot of the free weight lifts, it just didn't really seem to work well with me. Over time, I've been able to modify certain things. So I can still barbell lift, and I do it often enough. But I was reading a Mike Menser article on nutrition, which actually years later, Ellington Darden told me it was probably ghost written and not written by Mike at all. But that kind of got me into the high intensity world. And eventually you come across Arthur Jones, because he is the father of all of it. And I started learning about his Nautilus machines. You start reading his Bulletin 1s and Bulletin 2, which are still fantastic to go back to and read. I still get fired up when I check into them. And he talks about his Nautilus machines. So the first two machines I bought were a first generation Nautilus pullover with a pull down combo, and a double chest, which is a chest fly and a press from the same seat. So what he was doing with those machines, it was the pre-exhaust. And for those who don't know what a pre-exhaust is, you do an isolation motion for the muscle followed by a compound. So in the case of the double chest, you do a fly, make the chest exhausted, and then you'd use the fresh strength of the shoulders and the triceps to do a press, hopefully creating more fatigue in the targeted chest musculature. Now you can do this with a set of dumbbells. You can do the fly right into the press, and you can do this with a dumbbell pull over and then go right into chin up. So it can be done with conventional equipment, but Arthur designed machines that without moving seats, without having to get up, you can do both of these exercises. And done properly, it's very intense. So I bought these two machines, moved them into my parents' basement. I always joke around that I'm lucky they didn't kick me out of the house, because for those who have not seen the machines, they're very, very large.
Yeah.
And the other thing I actually learned a few years ago was that Kim Wood, who is a big guy, and I think Kim Wood's about 6'2", he was the original model that was used for the design in a lot of these machines. So I get into these machines and they just fit me. They're fantastic. A lot of the old Nautilus machines certainly fit a taller individual, someone who's broader in the shoulders. I have them here on my floor. Some of my smaller female clients, we don't really use them too much because they're just too big. They have to stretch out to get to the movement arms. But I get into them and it fit me. And I was like, wow, this is fantastic. And for those who have ever used a Nautilus pullover, they know it just hits the lats. You can get very deep into a set if you keep your posture right, if you're pushing through the elbow pads as opposed to pushing through your hands. You can really make a nice set and training the lats with them. And I liked it so much. And I also liked training out of my parents' basement. I had a commercial gym membership like most other people, and it was fine. But having these machines and having access to everything, we play the music, whatever we wanted, as loud as we wanted, and just being able to go down some steps, it was a bit of an addictive feeling. So I started learning more about the Nautilus machines. And of course, the heart of a Nautilus machine is the cam that is not circular. Most machines before it had circular pulleys. So the resistance curve is basically just dictated by this circular pulley. There's no thought to increasing or decreasing the weight at any point in the range. So Arthur comes up with this cam concept. Actually say his son, I believe, came up with it, and Arthur utilized it. And he starts building these offset cams, and every machine has a different one. And how he came up with his strength curves is still debated with a lot of the Nautilus experts to this day. But he did, of course, make a different cam for every machine. And the idea was trying to match the strength curve of the machine to the muscular output of the person. And certainly a lot of those early Nautilus machines, they had a very aggressive curve. And when I say aggressive, it means as you move towards the contracted position, in general, the resistance increased around 20-30%. So especially if people aren't used to it, they really feel something different when they get on a Nautilus machine, because they're used to having normally more of a drop off if you're dealing with a free weight. If you were to think of a dumbbell fly, you're limited to the resistance that you can use in the stretch position or the bottom position. That's where it will feel the hardest. That's where you have the least amount of leverage. And then as you move to the top and your arms become perpendicular with the ground, you no longer have any resistance. You just have locked out arms. Whereas if you were to use one of Arthur's chest fly machines, at the top, you're holding the resistance with the musculature of the chest. And it's, again, probably about 20-30% heavier. So it becomes, at least in my opinion, a much more challenging motion. I think probably a more effective motion than a dumbbell fly would be.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's the main thing here, isn't it? That these Nautilus machines and MedX and so forth, have these strength curves that match the human body in so many of these different exercises. And that's what makes them so fun to use when you train with them, and so fun's maybe the wrong word, but effective for driving fatigue and target muscles, which is why I miss using MedX so much. Do you want to just elaborate again on maybe some of the other differentiators in terms of these machines versus, more conventional machines in terms of some of the other attributes? Or is that the main difference in your opinion?
No, there's quite a bit more. One of the very interesting things about the Nautilus machines is it's easy to look at something once it's been built and say, oh, that's simple, or, I can replicate that, or I can copy it. And a lot of people did copy Nautilus machines. There was a lot of poor copies that were even painted the same Nautilus blue color. So you think about, he made what was called a compound bicep machine, and he wrote articles about it. And it was all about, you want to put the bicep in the contracted position. So that would be supination of the hand and wrist, and then flexion of the upper arm. But then you also have to move the elbow joint pretty much up and over the head. So if you could think about grabbing a high pulley, one arm at a time, and then pulling that weight down to pretty much the back of your neck. When you use it, it gives a very, very hard contraction in the bicep. Now, some people would debate whether this is even necessary or even the best way of doing things. I'll leave that debate up to other people. But it was a very different concept. You don't see anybody trying anything like that, at least that I'm aware of, previous to the Nautilus machines. Again, the Nautilus pullover, that huge range of motion, moving from behind the body to that weight all the way over to touching you generally on your legs or your waist, depending on your height, pushing through the elbows and that direct resistance on the back. These are very different concepts when you're getting back to the early 70s. The first machine that he put out, at least commercially, that wasn't one of his many prototypes, they called it the Blue Monster. They released it at, I believe, a West Coast bodybuilding show in it's either 70 or 71. I'd have to look into it. And it was a multi-station for the back, and it had a conventional pull down that you just hang on to. Like when I say hang on to, you'd use your grip for. But then it had the pullover, it had a lat adduction, and it had a rowing torso. And a rowing torso is basically like doing a rotary row type motion. But again, you're not holding on to anything. These pads are sitting on the back of your arm, so you're bypassing the bicep and forearm involvement. And again, these are all new we have them now. There's probably 30 different copies of any one of Arthur's machines. He was really putting out something that had never been seen before. And then he starts playing with the the double machines that I was talking about earlier, where he has an isolation motion and a compound motion from one seat. That still, for the most part, isn't seen today. Later on, he'd get into infometric machines where there was no weight stack and you're just working one part of your body or one side of your body against the other. So one of his most famous infometric devices was his infometric bench press. And you'd lay down, and as you pushed out with the right arm of your body, the left arm would create the resistance by its negative strength, by resisting against it. Now, the big issue with doing it this way is human error. It's very easy to just go through the motions and make it look like you're working, but producing little in the way of force and tension to the muscle. Whereas if you get someone who has the right mentality, it can really push themselves. You can create enough fatigue that after a 60 to 90 second set, you realistically can't lift your arms anymore. Now, again, that kind of fatigue might not be desirable, but it was very interesting that he was creating devices that would allow you to do that. Again, I'm not aware of anyone else that was putting out anything that was, for lack of a better term, high tech at the time.
Yeah, it's and I've seen that exact machine actually. That because you've got a version in your gym or one of your gyms, which is it's strange to look at. It's not it doesn't obviously have the weight stack, so it feels from the untrained eye, it kind of looks unfinished, but I appreciate it's a completely different mechanism. I'd be interested, talking about, I appreciate you giving the background of some of these more sophisticated machines. Do you think, when you look at, I guess, more modern's probably the wrong word, machines that have been manufactured in kind of recent times, that, looking at it, I wouldn't know if they had, I perhaps would have a keener eye now listening to you, but I would know what kind of cams they had and how they operated compared to like Nautilus or MedX. But do you think is there enormous downside in some of these machines that people might be using in conventional gyms? Would they have none of these kind of adaptive strength curves in place or cams?
You can do a lot with pretty much any tool. You've had Brian Johnson on before, and he is, in my opinion, one of the greatest freestyle trainers, bodybuilders that I've ever met. And he can take any kind of device and figure out, okay, this is where the resistance is very effective for me or very effective for one of my clients. This is where it really drops off. And he plays with different zones. And he does a very good job of turning almost any tool into something that can be effective. I'd consider him to be a master at that. As for the machines, when they went to the MedX machine, again, kind of sticking with the line with Arthur, most of the cams on those machines get more passive. Or what I mean by that is in the contracted position, they certainly get easier. A lot of them don't ramp up the same way. Now, interesting enough, on some of his medical machines, which Arthur's, I believe, had more to do with than just the general selectorized versions, some of them can have some relatively aggressive curves on it. It is again very debated. Did he have a mathematical formula for these curves? Was he just kind of coming up with it as he went? I'm not exactly sure myself, and everyone has their different opinions. If you get into the plate loaded line of equipment, so you had the Nautilus leverage line, which was made largely by Gary, his son, and then Gary went on to, of course, make hammer strength, which kind of became the next big Nautilus in terms of how many gyms were acquiring the pieces and how many they sold. They were starting to use just the leverage, just the actual movement arm, the way that it moved through time and space was creating the variable resistance. And some of them I thought were really good. Some of them I thought weren't so good. And then when you were at the resistance exercise conference in Minneapolis with us, we had Pendulum show up, and I'm a big fan of the Pendulum machines. As far as modern exercise machines go, are things that you could buy brand new today. I think they're as good as it gets, and they're all plate loaded machines for those who don't know. And the gentleman who designs them, his name is Tyler Hobson. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Tyler. Very, very smart individual. And he uses linkage systems to create the cam effect. And again, he has his beliefs on where it should ramp up and where it should fall off. And if you just get on a lot of these pendulum machines, they certainly have different resistance curves than getting on. I don't want to take any other brand and give it a bad name, but there are certainly equipment manufacturers out there that, in my opinion, they make it look very pretty. They just slap on some shiny paint and some nice stickers, and the weight stacks can be very light. For strong individuals, they don't put enough resistance onto them, and they don't put good bearings in them. And yeah, I mean, you can still get a workout with them, but if you've been on a properly designed machine, or someone who's put very heavy duty bearings in it to make it very smooth, someone who's really thought out the strength curve, even your typical layman, in my opinion, can really feel the difference. I know as a business model here, one of the things that we do is we put people on some of these machines that might be unique in the sense that they've never used one before, never seen one before, but the feel of it, the feel of the cam, the smoothness, especially in the MedX and the Pendulum machines, they've just never experienced it before. So you're giving them the idea, you're selling them on the idea that the workout here is going to be unique from what they have felt previous to coming in your door.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to do that as an excellent selling strategy, I'm sure. What are your, you're so knowledgeable about machines. You've got, and you're very, it seems like you're very open-minded. You won't judge based on brand. You'll actually look at the machine very closely and look at the mechanism and the way it's designed, and then use that to kind of base your opinion on whether that machine's good or not for that particular exercise. Talk to us about your favorite pieces for the kind of main muscle groups. I'd love to hear, if you had to pick 5 or 6 pieces that cover the whole body, what would you pick?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, when I was transitioning between gyms back in 2008, 2009, we had been renting space where I had a room that was about 1,700 square feet or 1,800 square feet. I'm not sure. And then we had a second room beside it that was another 2,000 square feet. Now, 1,000 square feet of that we had for mats, and we ran martial arts out of it. And then we had another 1,000 square feet where I just put my free weights at the time. So I had a decent amount of open space. And the next gym I wanted to own myself, so I bought some property, put a building up, and the original call was for 2,400 square feet. And due to permits and due to regulations in my area, the largest they would grant me was 1,000 square feet. So I had to choose what was going to be on the floor, and I had to put other things into storage. And during that transition process, I wanted to make a small makeshift gym back at my parents' place because they still had this open basement. And again, I had to cherry pick from there. So again, coming down to, you have to make that collection or those machines smaller and smaller to make the best out of it. So I got a little bit of experience with this. Now we'll start with the big legs and hips. My favorite leg press, and if you were to ask many of the people that you talk to, I'm sure they'd probably say the same thing. The MedX Avenger leg press is one of the smoothest leg press I've ever used. There's something about the biomechanics on it. It's fantastic on the knees. You can put a good amount of weight on there for a very strong person, and you're gonna light their legs up. Again, you can just put a 45 on there for someone who's just getting started, and it's a very versatile machine. It's got a 3-way adjustable seat. If we're going into a squat where I want to have some lower back involvement, I don't know if you used it at the rec conference in Minneapolis, but they had a Pendulum standing squat machine.
No,
that's by far my favorite squat machine. That's the one Dr. Fisher used in his demonstration.
Where you're screaming.
He worked hard. He worked very hard. And the one, I guess, weakness in Arthur's lineup, even his dual squat machine, which is a great machine, it's really a leg press. There is no lower back involvement. So when I think of a squat, I want to have lower back involvement. So if we're talking compound lower body, the Avenger leg press and the Pendulum standing squat, they really stand out for me. If we're going into the upper back, I've always been a fan of the Nautilus pullover. You'd probably want to add some sort of chin-up bar, pull-up bar. You can just hang it off a wall and you can get a tremendous amount of benefit from doing chin-ups, especially the original plate-loaded version, the very first plate-loaded version that Arthur was very heavily involved in its design. It's fantastic. Now, you have to be a little bit larger in the shoulders to get the most out of it. I got a couple of friends who bought the machine who have a more average build, and they didn't like it as much. There's other models of the Nautilus pullover that were made for people that are a little bit more narrow in the shoulders. They get more out of them. But certainly the first generation plate-loaded pullover would probably be it for the back. Moving on to the chest, I have a lot of chest machines that I like. I'd probably go with the Nautilus double chest just because out of one footprint, you get two motions. You get the fly and the press. Now, the interesting thing would be Arthur made a machine called the 10-degree chest fly, which is a very common machine, probably made thousands of them, just a lie-down fly machine, and the pads kind of cusp in your forearm and your biceps for those who aren't familiar with it. And that fly is a superior fly, in my opinion, to the one that's on the double chest, but then you don't get a press from it. And I love the MedX selectorized chest press and the Pendulum chest press. Better chest presses, again, I think, than the decline on the Nautilus, but because you get two motions on the Nautilus, it's just the way to go. I mean, whenever you can get more motions in a smaller space, and also the pre-exhaust. I kind of fell in love with pre-exhaust training after visiting Roger Schwab twice down in Philadelphia and playing around with his X-Force machines, which we could talk about that a little bit later. Mm-hmm. And he's a very big proponent of pre-exhaust. He even mentioned him when he was on your podcast as well. And there is something about doing that really intense isolation motion and then going into that compound motion with Arthur wanted less than 3 seconds, and on his machines you could do that. The first time people experience it, it wakes them up. It wakes them up in a hurry. It's very, very challenging. Going on to the shoulders, the MedX overhead press or the MedX shoulder press, I've always really enjoyed because it isn't a true overhead press in the sense that you don't push directly over your body. It does have a second set of handles that allows you to, but it's almost like a steep incline press. Hammer Strength actually made a steep incline press as well. That is nice. And if people have rotator issues, some sort of shoulder impingement issues, they can't do a true overhead press. And you just give them that little bit of incline, and a lot of them can work through a very safe, very full range of motion. So I do enjoy the MedX shoulder press in that category. And then moving on to arms, my favorite bicep curl was the old plate-loaded Nautilus. And if you're not familiar with that machine, it actually had a bicep and a tricep station from the same machine, and they were facing each other. So you could have two people working out on the one machine. The bicep was awesome. It was a preacher curl with a very aggressive cam. Most people liked it. There's some very large individuals can't fit into it, which is unfortunate. It had a very tight seat. The tricep on the other side was only okay on its best day, unfortunately. And as for triceps, and a lot of people are surprised when I say this because I do enjoy a lot of these exercise machines. I got some rare stuff. I got some very cool stuff. But I've always just enjoyed training my triceps the most with cables. It's one of the things where I will generally go to a push down or an overhead tricep extension with a rope, and there's just something about doing it with cables that normally that's my go-to. And I still use machines for my triceps, but I'm very cable dominant with my training when it comes to triceps.
Interesting. So even versus like because I know you've got a MedX, is it a tricep push down? I don't know the official name for it. So you would still your preference would be cables over that, something like that. So
yes, they had the MedX tricep machine, mm-hmm. and then they had the MedX dip machine, which is nice. And then as far as the old Nautilus goes, they actually had what was called a compound tricep, which is the exact same motion as the MedX tricep, where you're pushing the arms behind your body into the fully contracted position. Like that machine a lot. You need longer arms to really get the most out of it. A lot of people that are more average built, they can't even do it properly, which You could call that a design flaw if you wanted to. But again, they were using tall people for the models, especially Kim. And there's just something about the cables that works for me. One of the things that I think some of the, I guess, intensity-based facilities get to is they want to rely only on the machines. And don't get me wrong, I love the machines as much as anyone. And I've spent a good amount of time sourcing them out and shipping them, and I've probably spent more money than I care to admit. But realistically, I like having my free weights and my cables as well. I have competition bars, competition plates. We have what's called a monolift, which is basically a hydraulic squat rack, which allows you to change the height from, someone who's 5 foot tall to someone who's 7 foot tall without unloading the weights. That's what they use in competitions when they have multiple lifters. And we've run a powerlifting team out of this gym for a while. So it certainly allowed us to save time and be safer when we're dealing with a team setting. And, even every now and then I like to go back to a workout where it is only free weights and I'm only lifting the bars, I'm only lifting the dumbbells. It doesn't happen all the time, but you still want to be proficient with those movements if possible. I remember talking to Randy Roach years ago, and it was his contention, I do believe he was correct, that if you get someone who's got the right nervous system, and what I mean by that is someone who just can control their body, they're generally going to be very good athletes, they're going to excel at anything athletic, you can give them rocks and they're going to get tremendous results because they can just control them, they can utilize them, they can master these very basic motions. And then there's other people that, unfortunately, you give them a very simple task like a dumbbell curl, and they can practice and practice and practice. And even with light weights, it's all over the place. Someone like that gets on a MedX machine where I can adjust everything right to them, and they're just going to get a better workout because the machine is taking care of some of these problems for them. So it's nice to have all these tools if possible. And I do see some of these intensity-based facilities, and we have them too. They'll get a set of power blocks. It takes up almost no space at all. Yeah. You can get them from 5 pounds to 150 pounds if you had someone strong enough to use them. And it's great. The dumbbell will always be a fantastic tool used properly. But I do enjoy the machines.
Yeah. And I was trying really hard not to interrupt you during your when you were listing your favorite machines, not because I thought you weren't doing a great job, but because I was getting excited because I have a similar preference to you, especially when it comes to the overhead press, the MedX machine for that, which I miss using a lot, and maybe using again soon. Who knows? Some plans going on in the background, which I will talk to you about offline, Mike.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
But yeah, I will link to everything you're saying and the machines and everything. I will link in the post, and certainly link to the YouTube video, which gives your most recent tour, because your gym is really a strength training enthusiast playground. It's just awesome. And I love how you've not just strictly gone and said, okay, we're just going to have these machines. You've been, you've got everything. You've got lots of different brands, you've got free weights, all these cool bars, all this stuff, which is really cool. Going back to machines specifically, for those that are perhaps just starting to use, let's say I get quite a lot of listeners who have just read something like Body by Science, and they're like, okay, I need to find the nearest studio. So they start using, MedX and Nautilus. And I suppose most of the time they'll be instructed by someone who gets it and can give them good sort of personal training and instruction on form and things like that. But for those that don't have that benefit, how do you normally instruct people use these types of machines? And what are the kind of principles that you teach?
Okay, so if I was to, I guess, start somebody fresh on a Body by Science Big 5 type workout, and say they were online, so they can't come see my facility. Again, for those who don't know, and I'm sure many of your clients do, it is some sort of leg press or squat or lower body compound movement, chest press, shoulder press, pull down, and row. Now, getting it done with some MedX machines under proper supervision. I remember Blair Wilson, who you've had on your show, and you also met at the rec there in Minneapolis. He's just about an hour away from me. Great guy. For anybody listening to this, go check him out in Toronto. MedX Precision is what he calls his business. And he started out with just those 5 MedX machines. And I believe he had the lumbar as well. And that would be, like you said, kind of the ideal way to go. But if you don't have access to that, I would find the equivalent exercises that work for you. Now, if you are a very good squatter, and what I mean by that is you have good control over your free weights, generally it means that you're shorter in the femur. If you have very long femurs, in general, squatting is not going to be a great motion for you. If you're shorter in the femurs, you have a much easier time getting into the hole, coming out with proper mechanics. Not to say tall people can't do it, but it's certainly advantageous to have those short femurs. Or if you are tall, sometimes the leg press is going to be better. A lot of gyms have some very good leg presses on the floor. Play around and see what works for you and pick that lower body compound motion that say, hey, I like the feel of this. It's easy on my joints. My knees don't hurt when I do it, and I can do it progressively. And that's your starting point. And then you go to the next exercise, which would be a pull down. Again, every gym is going to have some sort of cable pull down, or at the very least, a chin-up bar or an assisted chin-up machine. And chin-ups are a tremendous exercise. They will always be a tremendous exercise. And as long as you can do it safely and you can do it intensely, you always have to push yourself. You just pick something that is going to work for you. And then again, go to the row. I've always enjoyed dumbbell rows. Dumbbell rows are one of my favorite back exercises, and every gym is going to have dumbbells. So you don't necessarily need these fancy machines. I like them, and it certainly helps. And especially when you're training people all day, having selectorized machines saves your own back from not having to load plates nonstop.
Yeah.
You go through the 5 motions and you find ones that are going to work for you. And you know what? The gym you're at, it may have a fantastic chest press. These Pendulum machines, you can still buy them new. So I see them in a lot more gyms. If you're a university student and, you get a gym membership basically included with your tuition, especially in North America, I see these Pendulum machines more and more. Well, you might have access to them already, and their chest press is lights out. So, you can pick that. And then once you have your 5, you start writing down what your weights are. I'm a big fan of always charting what your workouts are. Some people like to go complete freestyle and just go by feel, and I have no issues with that. But I think for the average person, monitoring the numbers and making sure that they are getting stronger, they're somehow adding to the workout is going to be very important. And making sure you're doing it safe. Some people like to go 10-10, some people like to go 2-4. As long as the biomechanics are sound, and I do think everybody should get a trainer, at least the first few times they trained. When I first started when I was 17, I can remember I got 6 training sessions with a trainer at the gym I was at. I mean, he just had me do the typical 3 sets of 10, but he made sure that I didn't get hurt, and he showed me proper form, and I was off to the races from there. But just getting those 5 motions, ones that are going to work for you, because even I spoke earlier about the Nautilus compound tricep machine. I got very long arms. I get on this thing and it absolutely just thrashes my triceps. I get someone who's, say, 5'6" on it with shorter arms, and you basically can't even put them in the machine right. So that's a machine that they might as well just avoid, because it isn't going to get them the feeling. It's not going to get them the results they're looking for. They're going to have to modify it too much. So I just tell people to get 5 exercises, those compound exercises they talk about in Body by Science, the ones that are going to work for them. And then if you work them hard and work them progressively, you're going to get good results.
Yeah, absolutely. You've talked a bit about, certain machines and exercises which may not be appropriate for certain people based on things like height and body type. I'd be interested to hear you elaborate on particular exercises where you think maybe machines aren't ideal if they exist.
Well, the interesting thing about machines, and I actually covered this on, for those who don't know, I had a TV show where I am in Canada, and it ran in my market. And one of the things we did on the early episode in season 1 is comparing free weights to machines. And that's a debate that's, probably going to go on probably long after I'm gone. I think it's going to go on for a very long time. but we talked about a dumbbell chest press versus, I think we used what was called a hammer strength wide chest, which is a machine that I like. But say you have a shoulder impingement or some sort of shoulder injury, the hammer wide chest, like most leverage machines, it only has one track. It can only really, you can adjust the seat height a little bit, but it only has one track. So if you get on there and you start pushing the weight and it doesn't feel right or it bothers your shoulder, that entire machine is basically useless to you. It might be perfect for somebody else, but it's now taking up a lot of space and you can't use it. Whereas when you get a dumbbell, you get a lot more freedom with how you can track it. And again, you get an adjustable bench. You can do incline, you can do flat, you can do decline on certain benches, and you can probably find a motion or a tracking that is going to allow you to work around that injury. And again, at the conference we were at there a couple months ago, Dr. Ted Dreisinger, who has done phenomenal work on injuries and especially with the lower back, he talked a great deal about when we have these injuries, getting motion to them, not just sitting on our butts all day and hoping that the body heals it, but bringing exercise to those injuries, bringing the blood, the oxygen, and the nutrition. So if we have any machine and it just happens to not work for that person, then it isn't a good tool. But with a dumbbell, you have a lot more versatility. So possibly for that particular person, getting the dumbbells out is going to be the better solution for them progressing, building the muscle. And in the case of an injury, it might be a better rehabilitation tool. So it's hard to say that, hey, this one machine just isn't a good machine and you absolutely need to use free weights, or to say this free weight exercise is absolutely superior to the machine in all cases. I don't know if I could think of too many instances where I could say that conclusively. It really comes down to making the tool work for the person.
Yeah, it's highlighting how important context is, which I totally appreciate and can see that in my own experience. When it comes to when you see other high intensity training gyms or strength training gyms, businesses in general, Mike, what pieces do you think often get overlooked and you'd like to see be more widely available?
That's a good question. I have always been a fan of what I call the neglected muscle groups. Now, actually, I think a lot of the intensity-based gyms are on the forefront of this, and we again, it was covered at the conference you talked about with certain people on your podcast, and that is neck training. I actually see more four-way necks in intensity-based facilities than almost anywhere else in my travels, minus some of the collegiate gyms that certainly use them for their athletes. But I'd like to see neck machines in almost every gym where there's supervision. I've told people for years, if I was owning a commercial gym with memberships, I probably wouldn't put a neck machine on because you'd get some teenage kid swinging his neck into it and probably causing injury. But done appropriately, I think it's one of the most important things that you can do. And I don't think I have one client at this gym who doesn't do neck training at some point during their month of training. So I'd like to see that more in the industry in general. I think people in the intensity-based community are actually further ahead than most in the curve there. But I'd also like to see, I have a rotator cuff machine here. It's got a ton of use in shoulder rehabilitation, especially, we try to use it for preventative measure, especially when we deal with our power lifters and the people that are doing the heavy bench presses. We like to make sure that the rotators are strong. And actually, I was joking around with some of the trainers at Luke's gyms there when we were there at the conference. He has 3 facilities, and he has a hammer strength tibia flexion in each of his facilities. And that machine is probably only worth about $100 to $200. You can buy it brand new for $500, which is cheap considering most exercise machines brand new are, at least $5,000. But if you try to buy one new, it might take 6 months to get one because they don't make them readily. And the tibialis is such a small muscle that no one ever thinks about, but keeping the integrity of the ankle, trying to help runners and
well, Luke's very biased in that sense, isn't he?
Pardon?
Luke's very biased in that sense. He's a keen marrow.
Yeah, he does. He has a pretty good I know he's a competitive runner. I think he trains some competitive runners as well. But again, you don't see exercise for that muscle. And I think it's because, no one's ever going to develop massive muscles in the front of their shins. And certainly if you were, going out to the bars and you want to look good, no one's going to mention about, oh, look at that muscle on the front of your shins. It's just, people, the women generally train legs and the men generally train chest and biceps. And you try to make the program a little bit more well-rounded for everybody. And just recently, I finally acquired one. It's actually getting shipped to me right now. I'm hoping to get it early next week. I have a homemade device for it. But just these little rotator cuffs, tibia flexion, again, the neck, these muscles that don't necessarily get a lot of training. And certainly when we do things like heavy deadlifts and heavy squats, there is effect on surrounding musculature in the body. But I remember when I bought my first 4-way neck machine, I think it was around 2007, 2008. And, I could squat a decent amount at the time and I could deadlift a decent amount at the time. And I was amazed at how weak my neck was going through a nice full range of motion. And I thought I was relatively strong at the time. I was probably sitting around 200 pounds and I was playing competitive hockey at a decently high level and I considered myself to be in good shape. And this is a muscle that I had neglected. I didn't have access to anything to train it. And I was shocked how weak I was. And at the same time, when I eventually started training rotator cuffs diligently, again, I don't know, I could bench a decent amount of weight. I certainly wasn't a 400 or 500 pound bencher like some of these great power lifters in the world. But again, the weakness was there. So a lot of times when people come into my facility and they have a shoulder injury, even if it hasn't been diagnosed yet, it's almost always a rotator cuff. 9 times out of 10, it's a rotator cuff. And having the ability, the machines make it easy, but again, you can do these things with free weights, but having the knowledge and the ability to train these smaller, neglected muscle groups, I think is very, very important. And I'd like to see more facilities move in that direction. As I mentioned, some of them are already on top of it, especially with the neck, but the industry as a whole, I'd like to see more of it.
This is a really interesting discussion point for me. This talking about, I could do a great squat or a great leg press, but then when I come to do, certain kind of more isolated lower body movements, and obviously this applies everywhere. So like you were saying with the neck, I wasn't as strong. So like, for instance, let's use your rotator cuff example. So you were bench pressing a fair amount. And when you come to do more direct exercise on the rotator cuff, you thought it was much weaker because you weren't performing as well. Now, how much of that is actual strength versus novelty? Because in my opinion, surely you are stimulating those muscles in those bigger compound movements. But of course, if you try something completely new that you've never done before, then it's going to be very novel and you're not going to have that specificity down. So you're almost starting from baseline again to a degree, unless you personally notice that you had measurable or appreciable muscle hypertrophy, although that's not even that reliable, when adding that exercise to your routine. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And you're absolutely right. Strength is the combination of the muscle mass you have available and then your nervous system's ability to basically send that electrical signal and get everything going. And certainly getting better at anything, practicing anything, is going to make you better at it. With my powerlifting team, I know some people in the high intensity community probably look at the volume I have them do and say, wow, that's too much, or they're overtraining. But you have to understand that they are literally in the sport of lifting a barbell. So they need to be practicing that. And it just so happens that the sport and the overload is the same thing. So you look at some of the best Olympic lifters, they're in the gym all the time, but they're not necessarily lifting heavy all the time. They might be doing certain days where they're only lifting 50% of their max for doubles, which, isn't even enough to make their body realize, it's not enough to create any sort of decent fatigue, but they're constantly having to practice everything. So there's no question that when I would have gone to some of these exercises for the first time, I would have been getting better at them and I would have seen an increase in the numbers. But what I can tell you is that, say, I'm on a rotator cuff machine, and on mine, I believe the top plate is 20 pounds. And there's a lot of people, they start off and you put that 20 pounds on there and they're having a hard time getting through a full set. And then, maybe a month later, 6 months later, year later, however they progress, they're doing 60 pounds. Well, I can assure you that 60 pounds, if they attempted to budge that kind of resistance on day one, they probably would have torn their rotator out. And now that they can do it with good repetitions and in control, I can assure you the structural capacity of the rotator cuff of their shoulder is going to be much greater. And because it's greater, we're going to be preventing injury, especially when we're doing heavy bench pressing, or if they're in a sport like say baseball, where you're pitching all the time. You are always trying to increase the structural capacity. And that's something that Mike Gittleson talked about in his seminar. So there's no way that I'm aware of conclusively saying that, okay, this was largely a part of me building more muscle, or this was largely a part of nervous system adaptation. They both go hand in hand. But if you can handle that additional resistance and do it in a safe, progressive manner, I assure you it will take much more to injure you. And that is one of the main things that we should be trying to accomplish as practitioners, is not just making sure that people aren't getting injured when they're training, but making sure that, if they were in a car accident, having a strong neck can sometimes be the difference between walking away and having a stiff neck for a day or two, or having soft tissue damage that takes several months for them to recuperate from. So I do still believe in the power of directly strengthening these neglected muscles.
Yeah, I completely agree with you with regard to the neck. I think that's a muscle that doesn't get as well stimulated in a lot of other exercises. So hence why I would say that's more important to do direct work on the neck. Where I'm very skeptical though is your argument around the direct work in terms of strengthening the example you gave regarding the rotator cuff. And it's compelling, but I don't think there's any scientific evidence to support it at the moment, is there? Or am I mistaken? I'm
not sure if there is a direct study. Yeah. What I'd be saying, I guess, would be more by my own experience, but I can tell you that the majority of shoulder injuries are rotator cuff injuries, as opposed to the outside heads of the deltoid. And a lot of times when I test people that have shoulder injuries, now certainly on the shoulder that's been affected, it's tough getting them to train it. It's tough getting it back. But almost without fail, when you test the strength of the other shoulder, it's not like they have a great deal of it. It's not like they have fantastic shoulder strength and they're able to lift all this resistance. It's generally you're seeing a lot of weakness there. So I don't know how you'd make a study that would properly answer that question. Would you strengthen their shoulders 100% and then put so much force on it, looking for what amount of force is going to cause that break or what's going to cause that failure in the shoulder? It's going to be pretty tough to do something like that. But it is my belief that the stronger the structures of all the body, the more resistance we're going to be to injury.
Yeah, this is interesting because I remember Luke Carlson saying this quite well, actually. A long time back, his belief was the same, that you certainly need to focus on some of these smaller muscle groups. I can't remember if he was talking about the example he gave as something to do with the lower body. It may have been the tibia, it might have been different muscle groups in the lower body. And it does concern me because I am definitely guilty of, I've got a routine at the moment where my only lower body work is a leg press, and it's a really crappy leg press at that, and a single-legged squat on my body weight day. And that's pretty much it. And then I do a bunch of obviously upper body stuff. And now I'm feeling maybe I should be adding in some more single joint or more isolated lower body exercises. But being a very kind of low volume guy, I mean, I can't handle a ton of volume anyway, not with good intensity. And that would mean that I may be better suited to an ABC routine, which would cover more of the musculature. Is that the type of approach you would take in that context?
To answer your question about like an ABC style workout, so what we try to do here at STG is we try to have multiple go-to motions, multiple machines for the same thing. So for instance, we have 4 compound lower body motions that are either like a squat or leg press type motion. And I have found that especially as clients progress and they get deeper into their training, that they don't necessarily need a huge amount of diversity, but certainly having a bit of a rotation with those big lower body compound motions as an example. It almost has a push-pull. So as you put one up, it kind of pushes up the other one. Then you go to your B day and you do a different leg press or a different squat. And as you push that up, it pulls the first one up. Whereas if you just do the same one again and again and again, I don't know if it's the mentally that you become stagnant and you have a harder time bringing the intensity level up, or it's a case of the body just gets so good at doing it that the muscles want to, it's not as intense on the muscles because the nervous system is just so primed up to do that one motion. I'm not exactly sure why it occurs, but it is my belief that having at least some option, not just doing the same thing again and again and again, is better. If we were to go to a big 5, it would be, and again, I don't know if it's ever been studied. I don't know if it's ever been done under the proper conditions, but I would believe, just through my own experience, that if one week you did a big 5, say strictly on MedX machines, and then the next week you did a big 5 only with barbells, or of course in the case of the pull-up, doing like a chin-up motion, because you can't do that with a barbell. I would imagine the results would be better for that person. Now, again, I can't prove that statement, but that would be my guess.
Interesting. So do you want to elaborate on, I guess, how you would inform kind of an ABC routine? So would you, even for a non-athlete, would you recommend a wide variety of exercises in an ABC type setup in order to hit, you insert those compound exercises, of course, but then obviously hit those smaller muscle groups more directly in addition?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll walk you through, I guess, what would be a typical workout that we would do here. Just someone coming off the street, assuming there's no injuries, there's no specific goal to power lift, or there's no specific goal for whatever sport they may play. They're just looking to get a good workout and get in shape. It would look something like we start off with a big lower body compound motion that's generally quadricep dominant. So on an A day, it might be an Avenger leg press. On a B day, it might be a pendulum standing squat. On a C day, it might be a dual squat. So again, you're looking at 3 different options that are all going to work the major musculature of the lower body with maybe more focus on the quadriceps. And then a lot of times the next motion is something to do with the lower legs. So we got a standing calf raise, donkey calf raise, and we have a homemade tibia device. And like I said, hopefully next week we get our hammer strength tibia flexion, which I'm looking forward to. And again, you can kind of rotate them through, still doing exercise for these muscles. I know obviously a standing calf raise and a tibia flexion are different, but I do like changing that up. Finally, it would be something that would be hamstring, maybe hip dominant. And again, we got a MedX seated leg curl that gets a lot of use, MedX hip abduction, hip adduction. We have a Nautilus hip and back, and then these would rotate through. And I don't need to do all of them in one workout, but I would rotate through them. Then normally we do a couple exercises for the upper back. It is the common theme is we have both a vertical and a horizontal pull. So you're looking at starting with a chin up or a cable pull down or a MedX pull down. And then you go into a dumbbell row, a MedX row, a Nautilus row. And again, we're not doing 6 sets for back. We're picking one of the verticals and one of the horizontals and working it hard, working it progressively and safely. We would go over to the chest. And certainly with beginners, I like to put them on a fly instead of a press, just because I like them working that muscle through its primary function. Especially you get someone on the machine I talked about earlier, that 10-degree Nautilus fly. They've never felt that peak contraction at the top. You could even say it's a bit of a selling point. They're like, wow, I've never had a contraction like that. I never felt my chest like that. Again, dealing with beginners here, maybe not someone who's been training for 10 or 20 years. And then going into the shoulders, MedX lateral raise, MedX shoulder press, dumbbell shoulder press. I actually very much enjoy teaching the barbell overhead press. A bit of an old school feel. A lot of people don't do it as much anymore, but I do. I have always enjoyed the feeling of pushing weight overhead. Now we do it with safeties, and we always have a spotter there. But again, big fan of the barbell overhead press. And then we move into arms, biceps and triceps. Same theme. You have your cables, you have your dumbbells, you have your barbells, you have your machines, and you're just picking a couple for each and going from there. And then at the end of the workout, this is actually where I generally put in one or two of these smaller muscles that we were talking about. Now, I understand that, for instance, the lumbar muscles are actually not that small. They're quite large, and they have a very high strength potential. But I don't want to fatigue the lower back before we go into some of these other heavy compound motions. I want to be strong throughout. So, for instance, if I had someone doing a barbell overhead press like I was talking about, I don't necessarily want them to have a fatigued lower back previous to doing that overhead press. The neck, rotators, tibia, torso rotation, neck rotation. These are all things that we add to the end. And again, I wouldn't do 6 or 7 sets and cover all these in a workout, but you pick one or two, and that's generally how we end the workout.
Nice. I appreciate you giving me some pointers on how you guys would do it. That's really helpful. We were talking before we were recording about how you've over the years been able to acquire all of the machines to pretty much replicate the Colorado experiment. Which is, for those that don't know, a very famous experiment conducted years ago where Arthur Jones and a couple of assistants put Casey Viator through a workout regime over, I think it was a month, to optimize for, muscle gain and fat loss, and try and showcase, what can be done with very, very low frequency and volume relative to the bodybuilders of the day. And the results were astounding. I mean, I think Casey put on something like 40 plus pounds of muscle during the experiment. Obviously, he's genetically gifted, but it's still a really good a demonstration of the efficacy of this type of training. So when are you doing your Colorado experiment, Mike?
That's a good question. I would imagine most of your listeners know about the Colorado experiment, but just in case they don't, I'll give them a quick background. Basically, Casey Viator at the University of Colorado, I believe it was 28 days, he engaged in high intensity exercise. It was basically every other day he was training. Now, and who you need to get on the podcast for this is Randy Roach, because he covered the ins and outs of this experiment in Muscle, Smoke, and Mirrors Volume 2 better than anybody.
Right.
And there's a lot of things going on there, from them basically getting Casey to eat about 800 calories a day leading up to it, and I believe he had some sort of infection in his hand or his finger, some sort of work-related accident. So they really made sure that they were dealing with a Casey who had been very atrophied at the time. But the one thing I've always found interesting about the Colorado experiment is if you look at the before pictures of Casey, I think he's like 160 pounds or 170 pounds. He looks better at 160, 170 pounds than most people will look lifetime training. That's how that's how genetically gifted he was. But what they were really trying to show in the experiment was negative only training, and certainly at the time, Arthur thought that it was a very result producing way of training. And with the new X-Force machines out there, and some of the other people that are doing the current research, again, like Dr. Fisher, and I know Luke Carlson has been doing quite a bit with the negative only stuff. I almost see a bit of a resurgence of it, but the Colorado experiment really was the granddaddy work when it comes to this negative training. And I believe Casey, when you said he put on 40 pounds, I believe he put on 45 overall pounds, but I think they measured him at closer to 60 pounds of muscle gain. And the 45 pounds actually represented he had lost body fat during the same time. I'd have to double check that. Now, other interesting note is he never actually attained a higher overall body weight than what was his previous best. And a lot of people like to say muscle memory, which it was. But also keep in mind that in the early 70s, I don't know if muscle memory is a term. I don't know if it's ever been talked about. So Arthur, again, is still ahead of his time, even if that's all he was doing was putting on muscle that he'd already had. But they used only Nautilus machines. And a couple years ago, I looked up, I believe it was John Szymanski's book, Younger Women, Faster Airplanes and Bigger Crocodiles, and he had all of the workouts listed that were performed. And I made a list of all the machines that were in the Colorado experiment, and I believe there was 14. And out of those 14, 8 or 9 of them are readily accessible machines, something that you could go on eBay or a Craigslist pretty much any day of the week, and you could go and you could find them. They made lots of them. It just so happens that the last few machines, the big ones being what he called the Omni machines, which were machines that had a foot pedal built in, so you could lift the weight with your legs and then lower with your upper body. The 4 ones were the Omni chest press, shoulder press, bicep, and tricep machine. They made them in very low quantities. They were very heavy-duty machines, and I spent a few years tracking them down. And with some help with some very good friends in the industry, I was able to get the last 2, which were the shoulder press and the chest press, which are not easy to come by. And I now have the full 14. And the only problem I now is I need more space. I got a storage right now, but it is my goal in the upcoming future to get some more space. And I would like to have all of those machines in the same room. Most of the workouts were, I believe, between 30 and 40 minutes long. He was given time in between the exercise. They weren't using the rush factor. But again, it would only take 28 days, and I could workout for workout replicate the experiment. The only alteration would be they had what was called a squat machine that eventually became the Nautilus dual squat, which I have. The original prototype machine is long gone, and it had a footboard that you would lift with 2 legs, kind of like a typical 45-degree leg press, whereas the eventual model they put out was independent leg. So I believe in 1 or 2 of the workouts, they did a negative accentuated set where you would lift with 2 legs and lower with 1. You could no longer replicate that dead on with the Nautilus machine because they never produced one for sale that did it that way, and I'm pretty sure the prototype is long gone. But outside of that, you could go workout for workout. I would imagine if you trained someone hard on those machines for 28 days, you would get some pretty good results. But again, Randy would be the guy to speak to. You would have to, if you want to replicate those results, you would have to start with someone who was genetically superior. Casey was just an absolute phenom in terms of his physical talent with what he could do in the gym and the muscle bellies that he had. And then you would have to take them, and you'd probably have to spend 6 months dieting them down. Again, at 800 calories a day, you're pretty much starving someone, especially someone like Viator who had that kind of muscle. They'd have to eliminate all weight training leading up to it. And then, and this is going to be a point of contention. I'm not really looking to make enemies, but I'm pretty sure that Casey was taking steroids during his early runs, even though there's a lot of people that said he didn't take them when Arthur was training him. I do find it hard to believe that with any style of training, he was able to compete and win against the people of the lifters of the time that were taking steroids. So again, not looking to make enemies, but I do believe that he was on them. Now, whether he was on them or not for the experiment, again, most people believe that he wasn't because he was apparently closely monitored. But if he had already built a certain level of muscle with steroids, it would be my contention that you could get them back up to a point above what they could with natural limits, even if the second time they were doing it clean. So you'd have to take someone who's probably on steroids for a few years leading up to the experiment and making sure they were as big and strong as possible. So there's a lot of factors that have to go into getting anywhere near those level of results. Now, where I give Arthur complete credit is that I don't know of anyone else in the early 70s is even thinking about any of these factors. that I just said. I mean, it might be more common knowledge now, and we have a lot of YouTube experts, but back then, what we're discussing is so far above the heads of most people in the industry that I still give him full credit for the results that he produced, even if he didn't put on 60 pounds of brand new muscle on Casey Viator.
Mm-hmm. Even if, I say, if you were to replicate it in yourself or in a subject, I mean, maybe not with the the leading up of 800 calories a day. I think that's perhaps a bit extreme. But if you were to just do it for maybe a little bit of promotion and then put it on your YouTube, that would be, I think that could work really well for you.
Yep.
Is that the plan, do you think?
I think what I would like to do is I could certainly see myself taking a couple of subjects. I got a couple people that are currently clients that would certainly qualify as being more genetically gifted in terms of their size and strength. And I'd actually, even if the results weren't anywhere near as staggering as Casey, I would like to try the experiment with people who are already at their peak. Again, it would be really cool if you would see Casey Viator after his Mr. America win, which I think is arguably where he looked the best in his entire career. And then you say, okay, now we're going to give you 28 days of the most intense, negative-only training that you could possibly do and see where it goes. Maybe he only puts on 5 pounds of muscle with that, but still 5 pounds of muscle with someone who would be at that level of strength and conditioning would be very impressive. And in my opinion, would show the validity of the training style. So it wouldn't be as jaw-dropping, but I think it would still be an interesting thing to do. And I think it would also be interesting to take a bunch of just average people with average muscle bellies and put them through those 28 days. And you might be surprised. I mean, I could see someone putting on 10 pounds in 28 days under the right conditions, like 10 legitimate pounds. But the only way to find out would be to do it. I think the biggest issue would be not so much controlling the variables of the training, but controlling the variables of the eating. Again, during the experiment, I believe they had Casey eating around 6,000 calories a day, which if you do the math, might not even be enough to have that much additional muscle growth.
Well, that's odd. How would that work then?
What do you mean?
Well, like if 6,000 calories wasn't enough. Oh, right, because of their potential performance-enhancing drug usage. Like, how would
No, what I mean
misunderstanding. Yeah, sorry, go on.
You need so many calories and so many grams of protein to sustain and build a muscle. So they can do a mathematical formulation of roughly how many calories you would need for X amount of muscle. So if you were to put on 60 or 62 pounds of muscle in 28 days, you could, figure out with a decent amount of accuracy how many calories you would have to feed someone. Like if you were only feeding Casey 3,000 calories a day, it doesn't matter how hard he trained or how much he slept or anything else. He just couldn't feed his body enough to grow that kind of muscle. So you have to make sure that someone was eating enough calories.
All right. Got it. Just moving on to, I guess, last question before we kind of wrap up with you, Mark, on the kind of machine element. But yeah, very interested to obviously learn more about, whether what you decide to do in terms of the Colorado experiment, replication. That'd be cool. Watching one of your YouTube videos, you talk about the transfer of the hammer strength deadlift machine when actually doing deadlifts in a kind of powerlifting setting, which I thought was really interesting because I did wonder why, I appreciate that. It looks like a really nice machine, a really good machine to use for kind of replicating a deadlift like motion. But why, if you're going for improving a powerlift, and obviously specificity is important for that, why not just train with a deadlift bar? Wouldn't that be even better?
Good question, and I'll give you the answer to that.
Cool.
So for myself, I find that when I free weight deadlift, and I do the lift, that I sometimes get twinges in my lower back just a little bit more than I would like. I have to alter my mechanics a certain way to really get the most out of the lift. Again, because of my height, I have to pull that bar a pretty far distance. And I just find on a week-to-week basis, every now and then, I just wouldn't feel as secure with the lift as maybe I would like. Now, this is a completely personal thing. There's other people that are going to grab onto it, and it's going to be the lift for them. So I actually bought that particular machine because Randy Roach had told me that when he did his 500-pound deadlift, he had been around 400, and I believe he injured his back somewhere around the 400, and then he switched over to the hammer strength version for no other reason that he could just do that machine, and it felt right, and he felt safe with it. And when I got the machine, it was the same thing. There's just something about that angle of pull. I can work very, very hard, but I feel very safe with that motion. And then he worked that up progressively, and he just decided for fun one day to go try the free weight deadlift. And I believe he told me he pulled 450. So that's, that's a pretty good increase for not really doing the free weight deadlift anymore. And that's what inspired him to then take the run up to 500, which he did eventually accomplish. So for me, it was just a case of week in, week out, I was able to do the lift relatively close to its free weight counterpart, overload the same musculature, and just feel very secure with my lifting. I have no doubts that if I had done the free weight version only or practiced it more than I did, I probably could have even hit a higher number that day. But the biggest thing with powerlifting is the long-term progression, every week getting a little bit better, a little bit better. So if I was doing a lift that I'm not as comfortable with, and even if, say I take a minor injury, just I take a bit of a tweak in my lower back, and realistically for 2 or 3 weeks, I can't lift that heavy weight. I can still train, but I can't lift that heavy weight over the course of a year. You just wasted those 2 or 3 weeks. Whereas at least for myself, I could get on the hammer strength deadlift, and I could make those 3 weeks very productive in terms of how hard I could train and being progressive with it. And that gets back to the early part of our conversation with there's going to be some exercises that work really well for people, and same exercise might work horrible for someone else. So it's nice to have options. With my own powerlifting team, we try to use as much time with the bar as we possibly can, because you're absolutely right. You want to be practicing with it as much as you possibly can. You want to be as proficient as you possibly can. But just in that specific example, I did very well with the hammer strength deadlift, and it allowed me to come back to the free weight and then perform it. So what I wanted to show was, you can still use machines to get very strong in free weight deadlifts. I'm in full agreement with you that it probably would have been even better had I spent more time with the bar. But it's not like if you use machines, somehow you're not going to get stronger with the free weights, or it's going to hurt the progress. And I'll give you just one more example of that. It was actually, I was talking to Mike Gittleson at the conference, and with the American football, I can't think of the gentleman's first name. His father is Howie Long, and his son just won a Super Bowl for the Philadelphia Eagles, and he'd actually won the year before with the New England Patriots. So he's now got 2 Super Bowl rings. I can't think of his first name, but he's Howie Long's son. And they do a test at what they call the combine. Again, most of your American listeners will probably be familiar with that, where
Sure.
they test athletic benchmarks for these athletes to get a better idea of who is going to hopefully succeed at the next level in pro football. And one of the strength tests that they use is a 225 bench press. Well, from what Coach Gittleson told me, that Howie Long's son had a shoulder injury and was unable to free weight bench press. It hurt his shoulder. But he used the Pendulum chest press, which is a machine that's very close to a bench press in how it works. There's no converging of the movement arms. It is a straight linear push, and I have found that it has a carryover to the free weight bench press in my own testing. So for months, he had the athlete only do pendulum chest pressing, because that's what he could do. He could do it safely and pain-free. It didn't bother his shoulder. And then a few weeks leading up to the combine, he then did switch him over to the free weight bench. The shoulder had gotten better, and he did want him to be proficient. And I think he knocked off 44 reps at 225, and I think he's under 220 pounds, or maybe right around that. So to do your body weight in the bench press or around that for 44 repetitions, that is unbelievably strong. And to do it without really doing any bench pressing for the better part of a year just shows that you can still effectively work the muscles. And yeah, he might have been able to do even a few more had he bench pressed for the entire year, but he was working around an injury, and I was working around a lift that I just wasn't as confident with. And in both cases, we were able to increase the free weight counterpart.
That's really interesting. So yeah, it's fascinating to me how much carryover there is to some of these exercises, because I think a lot of people are led to believe that they're very, very different. But in a lot of cases, as you described, there's real utility there. I forgot. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about your experience of X-Force. I just wanted to see if you wanted to comment on that before we move on.
Yep. Well, I mean, I don't think we can do a podcast around machines without talking about
Absolutely
about the X-Force. In my opinion, it all starts with Arthur and the Nautilus, and then it certainly moves into the MedX. And I give a big nod out to the hammer strength, because hammer strength was a byproduct of the Nautilus leverage and came through Gary Jones, Arthur's son, and Kim Wood, who again were very influential with Nautilus. And then going into the 2000s, I kind of felt that the next progression in that line was Tyler Hobson's Pendulum machines, which are still the best plate loaded machines on the market, in my opinion. So then I guess you could say the latest move in terms of the timeline, at least for me, is the X-Force machines. And for those who aren't familiar with them, they are machines that when you lift the weight, say you lift about 100 pounds, you lower about 140 pounds. And it does this by a tilting weight stack, which unfortunately it's an expensive way of doing things, but it is an effective way of doing things. And there's only a few facilities in the U.S. that have them. I don't believe there's any in my country of Canada. Maybe one day I'll be the first. But Roger Schwab, he brought in the first line in Bryn Mawr, just outside of Philadelphia, with Mainline Health and Fitness. And this is a gentleman who had, in my opinion, one of the greatest facilities anywhere in the U.S. for a number of decades, always on the forefront. He had Nautilus before everyone had it. He had the MedX, all the MedX medical before anyone had it. He was always above the curve, I like to say. And he sold his facility, sold everything out. I've never asked him what the dollar amount is. That's his business. But I'm sure he can probably retire and do whatever he wants. And he believes enough in these X-Force machines that he spent the money. He's got 2 complete lines in Philadelphia now. And I haven't been to his new facility. I've only been to his old one. I'm going to make the trip over there hopefully sometime this summer. But the systematic fatigue that you can get from having that 40% higher negative instantly on every single repetition is something that really has to be felt to really be appreciated. And when I did my workout under Roger's watchful eye, I think I told him afterwards, and I said something along the lines of, it's not that I was skeptical. It's not that I didn't want to believe in the technology, but I was very impressed with the feeling. I was impressed with how it worked. And I think one of the things it really does well with is you can go to slower speeds but still not underload the body. And what I mean by that is one of my issues with sometimes doing that 10-10 cadence, at least with myself, is I find that on the lowering, I can really almost, I can make it easier. I can make it so I can extend a set because I'm somewhat underloaded with what the muscles can actually output. And on an X-Force machine, I can get that really nice slow cadence, real safe, but then that negative hits, and man, does it hit hard. And I really liked it because I felt it was able to not only make my form better, or I could use really great form and still get off and say, wow, it just absolutely pumped me right up. It was a great feeling. And I think that, along with the Pendulum, one being selectorized, one being plate loaded, are kind of the 2 best current machine lines out there that if you had the money and the space and you were going to buy everything brand new, those would be my go-tos.
And what, over and above MedX?
I would feel, well, first of all, I don't think you can buy MedX new anymore. I don't think they're making any new machines. I know they have some sort of healthy back program where they're making medical lumbars and they're leasing them out and the clinics get a cut. But I don't think you can buy new MedX machines anymore. But to compare the two, I felt that as a line as a whole, I like the biomechanics a little bit better on the MedX machines. Again, you have to go piece by piece because some of the presses on the X-Force were just outstanding. I like the biomechanics a little bit better as a whole on the MedX, but what you can accomplish on the X-Force was really something else. And we try to mimic it here. We do where the trainer will add manual resistance to the negative. And again, it's not to say that you couldn't do this with free weights. We've done barbell curls where you curl the weight up, you're standing on bands, and you have a trainer on each side. And as soon as you get to the top, you put the bands on the top, and it adds, 30% to the lowering. So it could be done cheaply enough, and it will work, and it'll be a hard way of training. It was just nice, I guess, from a business standpoint and from a standpoint that, you're training multiple people in a day. You just put the pin in, you put them in the machine, and the machine helps them accomplish a great deal. Like I said, it's expensive, but it's very cool technology they're working with there. I was impressed.
Cool. Yeah, I've not used them, but they do sound really interesting, and I'd love to give them a go. No, interesting. Before we wrap up, Mike, obviously this is an episode that's been very focused on machines, and that's great. And I just wanted to kind of see if there's anything else you wanted to add, any important considerations when it comes to, buying machines or selecting machines for a gym. Is there anything else you want to add on that vein?
What I would do if I was going to start this all over again, and I did do this to a point, but I probably would have done it more so. Go out and talk to the people that have them. One of the things that I'm even doing now is I'm pretty much set with what I like with my Nautilus and my MedX, and I have it all. But there's 20 or 30 different machine lineups out there, and even if one of those manufacturers, they make 15 machines and 14 of them are junk, they may have got a 15th that was just right. They just happened to get it right, maybe even by accident. And in my opinion, the greatest collection that at least I'm aware of in the world is a gentleman out in Hawaii named David Feather. And as a lot of people, they ask me about machines, and I go to David and I ask him about machines. And I believe his collection is north of 400. And I've slowly been now acquiring kind of cherry-picked pieces from certain lines. I just picked up a machine called a Gluteator made by a company called Dynavex.
Yeah, I've seen that. It's a cool machine.
It's a very cool machine. I never used it, but a lot of people who I respect their opinion told me if you can get one, go ahead. And one came up for sale in Canada, so I picked it up. I'm very impressed. I think Hammer Strength made about 90 or so machines. I think I got about 6 or 7 of them. And there's a couple more out there that they got it really, really right. And some of their back machines are outstanding. But for instance, I don't like the Hammer Strength leg extension. It just doesn't feel right to me. So just because something is an off brand doesn't mean it doesn't have some sort of value. And if you see someone who's got a great gym or a collection that you like, I've found that anytime I've reached out to any of them, they're more than happy to talk about it because generally there's only so many people that are doing it anyways. I joke around with the Nautilus community when I was tracking down some of these rare Nautilus machines. You're only really dealing with about a dozen people. I mean, it's not like everyone in the world's collecting Nautilus machines. So they love talking about it. They love giving you their insights. Another gentleman who I just bought some of his stuff, his name's Tom Kenny. He makes the TK Star equipment. He's been making custom equipment for 40 years, like just one man in his shop, and everyone talks very, very highly about him. So I just started talking to him, and I got some of his stuff coming. And there's a lot of great stuff out there, and hopefully for those who are getting into it, they can design something that works for themselves very well, and they're looking to get into business, something that they can give that's very unique to their clients, something that hopefully their clients can appreciate. And I love going around and seeing these different gyms. Just in the last couple of years, I've been managing to get my weekends free, get a little bit more free time. And, I got to go down to Roger's gym, and, there's a lot of similarities between his old gym and mine, but they're different. And I enjoyed it. In a couple of weeks, me and Blair Wilson are going to Eric McKay's gym in Michigan. And again, me and Eric's gym, we have some similarities, but again, there are differences. And I'm looking forward to seeing it and trying out his toys. And I find that for the most part, these people are very friendly, very nice, and they're more than happy to share their time and knowledge with you. So I would say reach out to some of these people. And with social media now, it's so much easier to find them and to see their facilities. And It will also strengthen the community, which again, we could talk about that another time. But a lot of these people that some of them argue with each other, I find that we're all closer connected than we are far apart with our views. And if we could find more unity, I think collectively we would all have a greater voice in the industry.
No, I absolutely 100% agree. And, I've found everyone to be so forthcoming with information and knowledge. And, it's great, and really appreciative of it. And yeah, like everyone is just so open. And I guess just to summarize part of what you're saying there, like don't be, when it comes to acquiring new machines, not to be dogmatic about a particular line, and stay open-minded and judge each piece by piece. And like you say, a lot of this is down to personal preference, it sounds like. One person might absolutely love a machine, another person might hate it. But it's interesting. Okay, so we've got, you're so accomplished, Mike. There's so much we could talk about. Also, we haven't even touched on your training. But obviously, you've got, we've got to wrap up because we've both got things that we need to do. But obviously, I'd love to do a part 2 in the future, or even a part 3, to talk about some of these other aspects that you're involved in. What is the best way for people to find out more about you?
You know what? The easiest way is if you just want to do any sort of Google or Facebook search, the gym is called STG, Strength and Power. We've been fortunate enough to try to document most of the stuff over the last 10 to 12 years. And, we got some good videos. We try to keep the website and the social media current with what's going on. And, everything that you message will come straight to me. I spend my nights fairly late most nights trying to get back to everyone that I can. And I just like talking shop as much as the next person. So STG, Strength and Power, just do a search on it. It'll connect to me one way or the other. And I look forward to helping anyone I can.
Awesome. And for all of the show notes for this episode, that includes all of the machines that Mike and I mentioned, and all the different machines and people, and all the links and things like that. And please go to corporatewarrior.co/STG. And if you want to find a full list of all the episodes, please go to corporatewarrior.co/podcast. And until next time, guys, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. Before you head off, head on over to corporatewarrior.co/ebook to get your free high-intensity training Google Sheet to track your training progress. And get my ebook with 20 interview transcripts with some of my top guests, including Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and Bill Simone, on how to optimize muscle gain, fat loss, and overall health in an efficient, effective, and sustainable way. Head on over to corporatewarrior.co/ebook now and enter your email address for instant access. This episode is brought to you by MedX Precision Fitness in Toronto, Canada, a leading-edge fitness facility co-founded by my friend Blair Wilson, who has featured on the podcast numerous times. MedX Precision Fitness are highly respected in the strength training industry, and with the help of a wonderful team, have grown a very popular and successful training facility. They've been featured in the Huffington Post, the Globe and Mail, Toronto Guardian, and many more. They provide complete fitness in as little as 20 minutes per week and use evidence-based, high-effort strength training to give you the most efficient and effective workout you'll ever have. As many of you long-time listeners will know, this is the perfect workout for the busy executive. Aside from Blair's bulging muscles, there are no distractions, so no mirrors, no loud music, and no meatheads walking around everywhere. MedX Precision Fitness uses some of the most sophisticated and high-quality equipment available in the way of the MedX machine line, delivering you the best results possible. As well as personal training, they offer nutrition coaching and bod pod services to optimize your health, muscle gain, and fat loss, and give you instant feedback on your progress. Book a free consultation now by going over to medxpf.com. That's medxpf.com, medxpapafoxtrot.com, and book your free consultation now.